Speaking of reliability, a podcast with good friends talking with you about reliability engineering topics. Welcome to Speaking of Reliability. This is Fred Schenkelberg.
And this is Chris Jackson, and we're going to talk today about one of the lovely acronyms we hear in the world of reliability engineering, and that's FRACAS.
Well, isn't this from one of your students?
Absolutely.
You got a question the other day. You said, "Oh, I thought it was an interesting thing." As the student was like, "So are we going to talk about FRACAS?" Like,
yep.
No.
No, I rarely do in my courses because I don't think it's that valuable in terms of the effect it has. And FRACAS stands for Failure Reporting and Corrective Action System, which isn't the worst title for the intent of something. You report a failure.
I should actually come up with a list of worst to best acronyms, because I've often called MTBF the worst and HALT the second worst. FRACAS I don't think would be in the top 10. I think it's actually pretty straightforward, isn't it?
It's quite descriptive in a helpful way. And I think anyone who wasn't involved in the field would listen to FRACAS, Failure Reporting and Corrective Action System, and go, oh, okay, so it's a system where you report failures and then someone or some group of people are going to do this thing we call corrective action to make it go away. And I think we need to be a little bit clearer in the world of reliability engineering. When we say corrective action, that doesn't refer to repairing what broke. It includes essentially designing out the reason why that thing broke so it doesn't break that way again. So you still might repair it, but then you switch out the old material with the new material, or change the geometry of something, or use a different lubricant, or do whatever you need to do to make sure that particular failure never occurs again. That's whatever you do to make sure it never happens again, or at least limit its frequency, is called a corrective action.
Yeah, and there's emphasis, root cause, why did this really happen? And then it's short-term, long-term fixes and follow-up, which often gets neglected. And there's variations in how people do FRACAS and don't do FRACAS. And it's, I've seen it on a chalkboard. It was a small team. I think there were 10 people total in the engineering team, and they had a big roll around chalkboards in the corner, and every day they gathered around that with a cup of coffee or whatever and chatted about all the entries that were put on there by the various team members over the last day or two, and what are we going to do about these things? And it was very informal. And they had a set of symbols basically that said, it's added to the list. This is new. We've decided what to do about it. Now we're waiting for results of the analysis, and then we're going to try it and see if it fixes it or not. And then once it got resolved, they erased it and made more room on the board. But it was very, very much a living document and accessible to everybody. And it actually facilitated their morning discussions every day. It was brilliant. And I've also seen a system in a company that was kind of cobbled together with a bunch of people from all kinds of different organizations across the company. And they had 6 different FRACAS systems. And they had a full-time person just translating, this is the software thing, and it needs to go over to the software FRACAS system database. And this one goes here, and this one goes there. So they were spending an inordinate amount of resources setting up a system of a bunch of systems so they could avoid talking to each other. It was like, seriously? And I think the one you described was even better, though.
I mean, the most important thing about a FRACAS, for it to be called a FRACAS, like we call a bicycle because it has 2 wheels, pedals, handlebars, and a few other things. So bicycles can have bells. It can also can have a horn. Bicycles can have lights.
But just because saddles and a clip on the back for your newspaper, and
right. But just because you look at a product and says, well, that has a horn, a bell, and a light, you can't say therefore it is a bicycle. You have to say, when you have to look at a product and say, well, that has two wheels. The rear wheel is turned by a chain, which is connected to, crank and pedals and seat, which is clearly and handlebars for steering. Okay, that's a bike. I think that too many times this whole idea of a fracas is we anoint things as fracases. That's a plural fracas. Maybe it's fraci, but too many people anoint something as a fracas if it has the bells, the horns, and the whistles, so to speak. But the most important thing is what you said, Fred, a team whose job it is to routinely look at this list, triage and prioritize that list, and then go away and genuinely come up with corrective actions to make those failures hardly happen again, along with the resources at their disposal to implement those changes. What you're referring to in my course last week is when a student of mine said, we have a fracas. And I asked him, okay, well, tell me about this fracas. And it just turned out to be an Excel spreadsheet where people recorded problems. I said, well, who reviews a spreadsheet? And there was a struggling pause. And he essentially said, oh, I was just there so that, if in the future we need to do data analysis or track how we went, it's meaningless engineering gobbledygook to try and fluff your way through a claim of progress or capability. But and we quickly got through that. And I said, does anyone routinely look at this and make things better? And the next level of denial is, well, people can if they want to. That's the answer to a question I didn't ask. Unless the organization has a system where people are motivated, empowered, resourced, told, enabled to go and look at this list, triage and prioritize, and go henceforth and conquer, it's not a fracas. And the same goes with fracas software. People say, well, we need a fracas. We'll go buy fracas software. You go, you don't have a fracas if the only thing you're doing is buying software. All you're doing is just having a journal of your mediocrity enforced across your IT system. Like the fracas you described, for with a whiteboard, but motivated human beings, is going to be infinitely more powerful and useful and efficient than a $300,000 annual license for fracas software that no one actually bothers to go and look at, or no one feels like they have, well, no one exists in terms of going and looking at that and triaging and making things better.
Yeah, no, I agree with you wholeheartedly. It's the process, and it doesn't have to be burdensome or over the top. And the teams that I've run into is they say, well, what kind of fracas system should we get? And I said, well, how do you solve problems now? And well, no. They said, we want some software for this. Well, the software is not going to do anything for you. It's just going to keep track of stuff and put a number in front of it. You can make a fancy database. And one of the best ones I saw a long time ago, they called it DDT. DDT is, I think, now banned and not used anymore, but it was a bug spray to kill a bunch of bugs around your house kind of thing. And ended up killing everything else that ate the bugs or was in contact with it. But and it as far as I know, the origin of it was probably a smart program manager that said, I got too many things to keep track of. I'm going to write them down. And then when we get the team together, we'll talk about it, saying, Sally, what are you doing about this thing? Or is this in your area? Are you going to take a look at it? And eventually it became more and more exotic. And some of the software packages have 47 different entries, and it becomes daunting to even add a bug or an observation or an anomaly to the list. So it makes it prohibitive for people to actually try it. So my advice always has been, what's your current system, your manual, how do you do stuff now? Now let's go find software that actually supports your system. And as opposed to, and you see this with all kinds of software systems, is instead of buying the software and then hoping your team would adjust to it. I think that's roundabout backwards is the way I say it.
Well, the system is human centric, so it's all about facilitating your system, which is facilitating how humans interact. And if your software helps those 10 dudes and dudettes who were gathering around the whiteboard each Friday or whatever you described, if instead of that whiteboard, it's a software generated list, that software generated list allows inputs from a bigger geographic base, area or whatever, then that sounds like you're enhancing your software system. But if you don't have anyone looking at that whiteboard in the first place, buying software is not going to do anything remarkably different to doing nothing. In fact, it might just take up time, lose money, but importantly, for some, it creates confidence. Misplaced confidence, but we're spending money on this, but here we go.
Well, there's all kinds of ways that I've seen fracas systems just get destroyed. And I mentioned briefly one of them. I don't know if we were on the air yet or not. Is the team that got together had 6 different fracas systems, and they had somebody full time translating this entry over to this other database because they thought it might be useful for them over there. But it was all one team making one product, but they had 6 different systems because of the different preferences of the various teams within the organization. And that was not the worst. The worst I saw was they had a mandate, and you had to use the fracas system. You had to enter things that needed to be addressed, is the way they phrased it. And then they put in a reward or a bonus or a contest, basically, saying whoever knocks off the most things in the fracas system each month.
See where this one's going.
Gets a bunch of money. So people come in the morning and put their to-do list on it for that day, and then they knock it all off, and they get credit for answering the phone, for calling a supplier, for designing the circuit board thing that they were supposed to do that day, whatever. It had nothing to do with actually doing triage and who got what resources where, or whatever. It was pretty blind. Whoever knocked off the most things wins money. And so they did. And the team I talked to in the same building, but a different product line, the quality department embraced the fracas system. So much so that nobody wanted to put anything in that system because they were a pain in the butt. They called you every day. They showed up in your office 3 times a day to making progress. We got to update this. We got to do this. What's going on with this? I told you. It's in an experiment right now. It takes us 2 weeks to run the test. Stop pestering me. Well, do you have any updates? And so they said it was an absolute nightmare. And so occasionally they would put a bug or an item in the fracas system because it was outside of their area, and they'd let the quality department go pester somebody else to go do something about it. And I said, well, that doesn't sound very healthy. What do you do with all the stuff you're finding? And he says, well, and we have our own spreadsheet that we share within the group, and we don't let the quality team see that. So there's lots of systems with good intentions and just run amok that I've seen with these systems.
Well, I think there was a good fracas there that spreadsheet maintained internally, but that's the other thing too. As a fracas is often seen as a pen waving exercise to resolve issues, and management, the grey suited middle management that we tend to get these days in big corporations and governmental agencies, i.e. those slick people who are essentially represent polished incompetence. They love an edict or a directive that shall use fracas. And okay, so that they are now part of the solution. They're not. I mean, if you want to be part of the solution, you actually have to be the solution. So a fracas works if and only if you have that team who's there to help the people raising the issues. And of course, it's not. We often see fracases used very well in design, where people just design teams, write down, okay, we uncovered this problem today, and it's a good way for design team lead to go around and help be on top of things and offer support where needed. But often that is just simply an aid for the individual design teams to sort of keep track of what they need to work on, and that works well. But that's in that context, that's fine. But it's when fracases where, like you mentioned, you put something in and it's more trouble than it's worth. And why would you put something in if you're going to be the one responsible for resolving it anyway?
Right.
If there's that's just doing something to create
punish people. If
right,
you shoot the messenger, you're not going to get any messages anymore. It's kind of
right.
the theory there. Yeah, I've seen that where if you put something in it, and it's obviously a problem with outside the realm. It's an electrical engineer looking at a prototype, and there's a software issue. Now, it may be known or not known by the software team, yet the ideal situation is that electrical engineer says, I was doing this and I got this error message. I don't know what it means. And here's the context. I gathered a bit of information to understand that what this is, but it's outside of my field to figure out what in the world this is going on. So I report it. I add it to the system. I spend 5 minutes adding some details and maybe a log, or sometimes a photo works great, just a touch of that first step in the root cause analysis, gather the evidence. And then it goes off to a team, maybe the program manager and the team leads sit down and go, all right, what is this? All right, we understand it. And the software team says, oh yeah, we know about that already. It's bug number 87. We're working on it. Or no, we've never seen that before. Let us take a look at it and follow up on it. It's that part. If that doesn't happen, which is discouraged by putting nonsense in there, just anything so you can tick them off and get a bonus, or you don't put stuff in it because it's onerous, or it causes, then you get assigned with another 6 hours that you don't already have to go solve something that you don't know anything about. And it's run the gamut of all kinds of systems to avoid actually saying, all right, is this important? Do we need to work on this? Are we already working on this? Oh, okay, this is similar to here. And I've been in some wonderful meetings where the program manager goes down a list of maybe 40 things that have been reported over the week, and very active development team with lots of prototypes going all over the place. And in 2 hours max, they would go through a whole bunch of issues and follow up on the ones that needed following up on. And they were constantly in the agenda. It was always a part of that gray area. We said this one isn't important, did we make the right decision on this? Do we know more now? And how are things interacting and relating to each other and stuff? And it was hard to keep up because there's a bunch of smart people in the room, very intimate with their product. And it's just, okay, I'm always was looking for the ones that were the reliability issue type stuff, things to keep an eye out for or to address. But they would go through this really fast, and they were knocking stuff off and making a difference. You could see it from one generation of the prototypes to the next. It was amazing that hundreds of issues were found, and dozens and dozens of the deemed more important ones were knocked out, and not trivially, but designed out. Now, the other acronym that I've run into that isn't as useful as what it really is the CMMS. And I've seen people use the CMMS, Computer Maintenance Management System, I think it is.
Yep.
To use it like a fracas. So somebody on the line says, hey, this thing's sounding really weird, or I think the bearings are going, or this is, leaking or whatever. And they call it in or report it, and it gets recorded in a CMMS like it would be in a fracas system. It's a machine number 6 on the left side has got a loose joint or something like that, or whatever it is. Stuff gets reported through inspections or observations, and the maintenance manager and team may say, all right, we need to address that and fix that. Corrective maintenance. I never heard them call that a fracas system.
Well, a question I ask people is, from organizations which have distinct CMMSs and FRACASI or FRACI or fracases, is what's the difference between the two? Okay, so, we talked about at the start that the corrective action is designing the problem out of the system,
For
whereas
development.
repair
Yeah.
or development, yeah, just making sure it could be also in maintenance, or it could be in how
It could
you
be in
maintain, or
manufacturing. It could be in the
could
manufacturing process.
could
They
be
find,
absolutely,
you
or
know,
operations.
yeah.
So, okay, so instead of using it this way, we need to use it this way, where every 3 minutes we do this or whatever. But that's a corrective action. Or a repairer is just going, okay, well, that bit that's hanging off, we're going to bolt that back on, or whatever's failed, we're going to replace or remove the damage that caused failure.
Right.
So, and a CMMS by name is all about corrective maintenance management system. So, okay, we're going to repair stuff.
I don't think it's called a corrective maintenance management system.
Computerized, sorry, you're right. Computerized maintenance management
and that's
system.
one of its functions. It also does, scheduling and planning for, preventative maintenance.
That is
part
true.
of
I
it
misspoke.
is a part of that. And kitting, so the better ones will have, so if you're going to go do this job on this piece of equipment, you need these tools, this equipment, you need 3 people. And the stores have the tools and the equipment, and the training is all there. So it can get pretty extensive, but I think at the heart of it is really a FRACAS system is where it started. We got so many things to go address. Which one do we do today?
Right, but there's plenty of organizations which have software systems that are normally the CMMS, and another and separate one is the FRACAS.
Oh, within the plant, yeah.
Yeah, or within the organization, and go, okay, well, when someone identifies a problem, which one are they going to? And then I've sat in plenty of conversations where the dude or dudette says, oh, well, if it's a critical failure or severe failure, that should go in the FRACAS. Okay, well, what's critical mean?
I heard critical defined in one factory I was in, is that the only time we stop the line to address something is when customers are complaining enough that the vice president is called us to fix it. Other than that, we just let it go. That's a critical one, is when the customers are really complaining.
Well, whatever works, I suppose.
Yeah.
But for everything else, what's the difference? And then I hear, those process cells, well, if it's critical, then people should put it in there. What's critical? Well, if it's just saving the vice president being called up as in your situation, well, it's, where it's going to cause loss of damage our brand, or injury or death. Okay, so all right, so who's making that decision? And if I walk up to any one of these people, will they be able to easily triage themselves? Well, they should. It's not what I asked. That's what you'd like, that perfect world, And these people they're hardworking, and any additional work that you ask them to do often replaces time they spend at home with their wife or husband and children. And so you can have a second computerized system, but I'm guessing if it breaks, they're going to have to put something in the CMMS first because it needs to be repaired. And then once they've gone through this very ambiguous set of criteria for what's critical means, they need to then, if they so choose to, go and enter something in the FRACAS.
Yeah, I've seen that where but it's also part of a problem, I think, with the maintenance teams that are sallied with minimal budget and said keep it running and don't do failure analysis, just get it running again. The ops team typically has the engineering teams in their realm, right? The maintenance group is sitting in the warehouse with the tools bin and they're turning wrenches, and they'll find and repair stuff and doing their inspections, preventive maintenance, and the production line folks will say, hey, this isn't working. They'll call maintenance, and they're treated as a separate entity, and they're using a CMMS, whereas that FRACAS element that they're doing would really benefit by having the ops team and the engineering teams as part of that triage right from the start. Because the ones I'm most familiar with is that the maintenance team would see a repeating problem.
Yeah, that's a big one. Repeating problems. Like, I mean, one of the reasons something becomes critical is because if it's happening over and over and over again. So
they elevate it. They say, hey, George, can you guys take a look at this? And it gets entered into the engineering practice system. but it's a barrier. They don't want to know about everything. You guys do this maintenance stuff all the time. Just do your maintenance stuff, keep the line running. But every now and then something would bubble up and say, we need to get this fixed. And we need engineers to do it.
Well,
We need
and that's
to do
a really good point. I mean, but so then you have this sort of mix match of systems that, the people who paid the money to implement it will say, well, this is how it's supposed to work. Okay. Is that actually feasible? So especially those scenarios where you have lots of small problems, which if it was just a one problem by itself that occurred once and then never happened again, it would never cross the threshold to being something that would be root caused out of a system. But if it happens 100 times a day on each site, then that might cross a threshold. So how do you get those things routinely entered into CMMSs, then transferred across to a FRACAS who makes the call? And I've never seen that work when you don't have the people, like those whiteboard people from the start. You've got to start with the whiteboard people, the people who are, are motivated, empowered to actually want to fix things and improve things. If you don't start with them, if you start with the software or the Excel spreadsheet, and then say, oh, okay, well, if people want to, they can. Stop this nonsense. And but it then becomes a solution that people will then parrot about, saying, well, we do have it. Okay, no, you don't. You want to say you have it, but you just don't want to truly invest into creating one.
Yeah, the teams that I've seen doing it well, they obviously get a benefit by using the system, engaging in it, is they're not spending unnecessary time solving things that are deemed, let's monitor that, or no, we already solved that over here in this problem, or it's whatever. It's been considered and triaged by the program manager, project manager, and team. Basically, the team gets together and says, no, we're not going to deal with that. Now I can cross it off my list. I don't have to worry about that. I got enough other things to do. And then when there's something important that's impeding my part of the design or my part of the factory, if the system's working, it's going to get addressed if it's important. And if it just goes into the black box, nothing happens, nobody's going to bother with it. And then you get all these shenanigans of dictates and mandates and bonuses and everything else. Or draconian over micromanaging it for every issue. But if it's not of value to your team, especially if it's a big complicated software, get a whiteboard, do it manually, and then find a system that actually supports that. Whether it's CMMS based or design based or production based or ops based or whatever, it's how do you go about figuring out what you want to work on and prioritize and allocate resources so stuff actually gets done and followed up on in short term, long term. Those pieces have to work first. Then you can use fancy computer stuff. I don't know. Maybe I'm old school on that. There's a lot of things where, we'll just get an AI system and add that to our CMMS. All right. Well, what the hell is that going to do for you? You don't use it already, add another horn on top of your bicycle. Now you got two of them. Okay, right. Great.
And I think, people just want to be able to point to the thing, machine get those pings, say, yep, no, it's there. It's doing its thing. Yep. No, it's not.
Well, I think we're just scratching the surface on this because there's some behavioral type stuff that gets into play that I've mentioned makes it work or not work. But there's also just and I've seen plenty of different ways FRACASes are set up and, setting up criteria and what gets gathered and all those other bits and bobs of it. But it's always a balance for what's your team, what works for your team, what works for your organization. It's probably going to be something to come back to at some point. But I'd like to hear, if you're using a FRACAS system or a CMMS, and is it in your way or is it helping? Is it useful for you or is it bad news? And how does this work for you? what made the difference to change it into something that's actually useful? As always, I've asked for, or many times I've asked for success stories. I don't get too many of those very often. We get questions or confusions or other stuff like that, which we appreciate. And we'll generally get an answer to you and look forward to maybe talking about it on one of the episodes. But if you've got a question or an observation or a success story, let us know. Head over to accendoreliability.com/SOR or /go/SOR. And you can find a couple of ways to get in touch with us. Chris and I and the other hosts of the show are available through LinkedIn and through our About pages. So unfortunately, Chris, I have a very, very simple FRACAS system since I'm the only one that adds to it and I'm the only one that has to check things off from it. And I think I have deferred maintenance, to use a CMMS term, of probably about 4,000 things. I should probably decide I'm not going to do some of them. But that might be a topic for my counselor or my therapy session or whatever they call it. But anyway, thanks for bringing it up, Chris. A question from a student can spark a whole episode.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure, Fred.
Thanks for listening to Speaking of Reliability. We invite you to join the conversation. If you have a question or a topic that you think we should discuss in a future show, please let us know. You can find a comment box below the episode show notes, or just leave a note as part of a review on iTunes.